All right, everybody, here is a game changer jazz articulation exercise. This has not only changed the way in which I approach articulation when it comes to a jazz context, but also my time feel. I actually use straight eighth notes pretty much all the time. And see, I'll show you the key to actually creating the swing feel lies in the articulation. Now we're going to use offbeat articulation, of course, but there's another added element that is often neglected, and that is the accent with the air. Now I'll show you there are 4 steps that I go through when it comes to refining my jazz articulation. First of all, step 1, straight eighth notes, slurred. That's right, slurred and straight. We want to have nice, even technique, first of all. Now, step 2 is I'm going to add a light legato tongue on the upbeats. Now, this is still going to sound like straight eighth notes, and I'll demonstrate, of course, but this is really the kind of interaction that we want with the tongue and the reed in order to get faster tempos eventually. Now, step 3 is the one that most people don't ever really explore. Now, that doesn't mean that they never do it, it's just that maybe they haven't thought about it. And what it is I actually eliminate the tongue entirely, and I use breath accents only on the upbeats. This forces me to deal with how to control and regulate my air and create accents that are going to be effective when it comes to creating a deep swing feel, especially on medium tempos. Now, step 4 is we just put it together. I want to keep the same legato articulation that I did in step 2, and then the same breath accents that I'm doing in step 3, and I'm just going to combine them. Remember, anytime we interact with the reed, we want to try to think about legato when it comes to eighth notes and jazz articulation, because the faster we go, the more obvious the articulation becomes with less work. Meaning, if I barely touch that reed, it's going to be heard, especially at faster tempos. Now, there are a few things that I want you to think about when you're doing these exercises. One is we're going to exaggerate a lot of the elements that we're exploring here, and it might not necessarily translate into the most practical approach. But what I like to do is kind of go to one extreme and then eventually dial it back down until it feels comfortable. And I'll show you what that means. Another thing to think about when you're doing this is that when you play at different tempos, the effect or the amount of different stylistic attributes that you're going to use might be different. For example, I might not breath accent every single upbeat if I'm going at 200 BPM or faster, for example. It's just going to slow me down and not sound stylistically appropriate. Now, let's say at a slower tempo, like 160 and below, but we still want to communicate a really deep swing, we're going to probably over-exaggerate as compared to a faster tempo, the upbeat accents with the breath. Now, the contrast between our downbeats and our upbeats, meaning our volumes and our accents, is what's going to create the deep swing, not my fingers. Now, we've all been through that stage where it sounds like this. Right? We all have been there. Now, for many of us, including myself, it's a matter of getting out of that habit. And that's why we're going to go the complete opposite, and we're going to do the straight eighth notes. Now, here's, for example, each step. Straight eighth notes, this is G bebop scale. We're going to use our dominant bebop scales because it allows us to get those chord tones on downbeats when we're playing eighth notes with the extra added note. Now, that added note when it comes to a dominant bebop scale is going to be between that 7th scale degree and the root. So we're not only going to have the flat 7, but we're going to have the natural 7. So if I'm playing my G bebop scale, I'm going to have an F natural and an F sharp. Okay, so step 1, slur. Okay, great. Now step 2, legato tongue on the upbeats. I want it to be almost like it's slurred. Remember, any interaction that we have with the reed, especially at faster tempos, will be heard. So I'm going to just tongue the upbeats really softly, or as legato as possible. And of course, everything that I'm doing is straight eighth notes in the fingers. Now that sounds like straight eighth notes. It doesn't sound swing yet. Now here's the third step, again, that most people don't really isolate, that I find is really effective in trying to actually communicate a deep swing at a medium tempo without changing the actual rhythm. Okay, so I'm just going to breath accent on the upbeats. So there's no tongue, but I want it to sound like I'm tonguing. Okay, now here's an important aspect of this concept. There are two different volumes that I'm playing with. One is going to be my downbeat, unaccented notes, and then the other volume is going to be my accented or upbeat notes. Now, the downbeat in this case is going to be the softer volume, and my upbeat is going to be the stronger volume. I want there to be a really big contrast, especially for this particular exercise. Now, again, when we're in the heat of the moment, when we're improvising, we might not exaggerate those upbeats as much. But this exercise is as much about the actual articulation as it is control. So we're gonna really exaggerate that. So if I were to compare my downbeat volume, my unaccented volume, and my accented volume or upbeat, here's my downbeat volume. I'm just gonna do it on a middle C, middle of the horn here. Here's my accented volume. Pretty much like pianissimo or piano to forte. Now again, that's kind of the purpose of the exercise, and there's a couple of things that you'll also notice that come with that are things that we need to be aware of. So now if I go between my unaccented downbeat and my accented volume, okay, now that leads me to the things that you'll notice not only when I go through the warm-up and you play along with me, but you'll certainly notice as well when you attempt it yourself. Now, when we really breath accent, there's a tendency to move the jaw, to take more reed in, to allow more of the reed to vibrate, or to make room for more air because we're pushing more air through. That's natural. Now, a lot of that will be eliminated in terms of any kind of scooping, which is what you'll notice. Even when I do it, when it's just the accented air, you'll notice there's some scooping that slightly happens, and that's just part of it a bit. Now, when we add the tongue, a lot of the scooping will sort of be eliminated. Now, if you already have an exaggerated scooping sound, it's not going to be entirely eliminated, so we want to kind of have as least amount of scooping as possible when we're doing the breath accents. But there's some that's just kind of unavoidable in the nature of the horn and the nature of over-exaggerating the accents. Okay, so here's step 3 again, just the breath accents. Okay, now I'm going to add in the light legato tongue with the same intensity of breath accents. Straight eighth notes in the fingers. Here's the same swing, but with the swing being in the fingers and not the articulation. Okay, that second version was the thing that we're after. Now, another thing that you'll notice that goes along with the scooping is the higher you go, the more, obviously, the more tendency there is to have any kind of pitch variation. It's a little more volatile up there in the higher register. So you have to be even more careful. Same thing with the articulation. The tongue is more, or the reed is more sensitive, I should say, when you articulate in the upper register and in the lower register. So it's a good idea to really just interact as the least amount as possible. Sometimes I tell my students just imagine you're tonguing, and that's enough to actually have them interact with the reed on a legato fashion. So what I did here is I went ahead and did all 12 keys of the bebop scale. I did 2 octaves for all of the scales, regardless if it's going into altissimo or not. That way, if you're playing alto, for example, you can still play along and not feel as though you're missing out on half the register, for example. The other thing is that we're at 92 BPM. I'm playing eighth notes for everything. I think that's a nice medium tempo. it is a challenge still to get the breath accents on the upbeats at that tempo. Now, we can certainly go faster and we can certainly go slower, but we start to kind of get out of the realm of feeling the idea and the concept behind jazz articulation and jazz swing. This is still a really slow tempo. Now, again, we want to create a lot of contrast between our downbeats and our upbeats, and it's going to feel really strange if you've never done this, especially if you're doing step 3 with the breath articulation solely. I went ahead and edited out anytime I'm clearing the mouthpiece just to keep it consistent so that you can play along and not try to anticipate, if I stop for a second or not. You will get fatigued. This is not an easy exercise. You'll notice, especially in the low register, trying to breath accent and not have the note go up the octave, or even just to get the note to come out, the reed is going to dry up. It's a really good challenge. So this has been a real game changer exercise for me. When I discovered this totally changed the way in which I not only approach jazz articulation, but also my time feel. It's sort of eliminated that less mature sound, regardless of the notes, because remember, number 1 is rhythm over everything. This is a much more stylistically appropriate approach to eighth note time feel, especially in the bebop sort of genre. Happy practicing.
you